Good afternoon, everyone. For those of us that are on the East Coast, a little central in there, good morning for those of us in Pacific time. My name is Eddie Wright, and I serve as the Vice President for Enrollment Management at Holy Family University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And today I'm working on behalf of ACPA in the 100th Celebration Committee. ACPA is very excited to celebrate our 100th birthday. That'll be coming up with a major event here in 2 weeks. But through this series or through the past year, we've had several different webinars going on. And today, we'd like to thank you for joining us for our supporting and motivating new to higher education staff webinar. I'm going to be your moderator for today. We have some great panelists who have agreed to join us on that. And so we welcome your questions as we're going through today. You can raise your hand. You can put them in the chat box. I have that open and we'll be looking at that. You should interrupt us if you want. Whatever it is, make sure you get the information you need or you're hoping from today's webinar. To get us started, though, I'd like to turn it over to Nikki. Nikki, you want to get us started today?
Sure. Thank you so much, Eddie. Hi, everyone. My name is Nikki Laird. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Housing, Occupancy, and Assignments at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also have the privilege of serving as the coordinator for the Communities of Practice, which is a set of entity groups in ACPA and on the Leadership Council, serving in that role. And today I am here representing the senior leader community of practice. Unfortunately, our representative from that group is dealing with the aftermath of the hurricane and couldn't be here. So I'm stepping in to share all about the senior leader community of practice. So that is exactly what it is. It is a community of senior leaders who come together to have conversations, to improve their practice. And like a lot of entity groups in ACPA, they have a variety of webinars and other professional development opportunities for folks. So they are currently, they would love to have folks join them. If you just log into your Member 365 portal and look up the Senior Leader Community of Practice, you will find them. They are actually currently in their awards process, so for fall, so there are opportunities to nominate folks for awards. They are also seeking some new board members. They've had some openings on their board, so if you're interested in getting involved in that way, that's another great way to join them. Or if you just want to get on their email list and find out what they're doing, that's a great opportunity as well. They do have two upcoming events. One of those is the ACPA Growing Knowledge Series, which is actually a collaboration among all the communities of practice, grads and new professionals, mid-level and senior level. And those are focused on doctoral research that has been done, but maybe hasn't been published, or maybe the author is not seeking to publish. The next one is on October 17th at 2 p.m. And it is on racialization and whiteness in college student leadership education efforts. The next one that another webinar they have coming up is on October 28th, and it's called It's Gonna Be Fine, Creating Opportunity Through Change. And the group also does a monthly senior leader community conversation, which I have used in the past. It's been a very great experience, and they always have a guiding topic, but honestly, it can change on a dime. So maybe the next one was supposed to be about elections, but it's going to be about disaster relief instead. It's whatever the community needs to discuss. And it's a great way just to have senior leaders come together and say, what are you doing in this situation? So again, Member 365 portal, sign up, get those emails. They would love to have more folks involved in their process. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to represent them today.
Thanks, Nikki. We appreciate the collaboration. And I love the title of It's Going to Be Fine. I feel as leaders, as employees, as workers in higher education, as students of higher education, those of us adjacent, it seems to be the running mantra anymore, especially depending on what's being thrown at us from other leadership or from other areas that we can't control. It's going to be fine. Thank you for that. I would like us to turn attention over to our panelists. We have a very great team of panelists today from different areas, different schools, different backgrounds to talk about this idea of supporting and motivating our staffs, especially those new to higher education. So, Jason, why don't you kick us off with some introductions?
Thanks, Eddie. My name is Jason Cottrell. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I work for the U.S. Department of Education as the lead research analyst in the institutional service area of the Office of Post-Secondary Education. And I have been a member of ACPA since 2008, I think. And so I have been involved in a number of different areas, working with ACPA as a volunteer leader, having served in state associations, and I was convention chair in 2022. I have been a member of formerly the ACPA Assembly, which was working with our state groups, as well as our commissions, coalitions, and communities of practice. And I'm here to represent kind of my viewpoint of being a leader, kind of adjacent to higher ed and to campus life. So.
Thank you, Jason. Lisa?
Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Kelsa, and I will apologize in advance if my voice gets a little rough. I just returned from Germany where I ran my first marathon, so I'm still adjusting. So apologize. Let me know if you just can't understand me. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Assistant Dean of Liberal Arts and Director of Academic Arts at Moraine Valley Community College, which is in the southwest suburbs of Chicago. I've been in ACPA since 1996. In addition to working full-time at a community college, I also work part-time as an adjunct faculty member at Purdue University Global, and I've been with them for around 18 years. So I've been in higher ed in a wide variety of areas, student affairs and academic affairs, throughout my entire career. And obviously I've been involved in ACPA as a volunteer leader as well throughout most of those years.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks.
Congratulations on the marathon. Toya.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Toya Younger. I have the privilege of serving as the Senior Vice President for Student Affairs at Iowa State University. This year, I am celebrating 24 years in higher education. And every time I say that, I get like heart palpitations, and then my back and my neck starts hurting. So it's been a while. So excited to be here today. Really always love to talk about new staff coming into higher ed. I have a very unique background. I have spent some time at national higher ed associations. I've worked in academic affairs and student affairs, and I've also worked at different types of institutions ranging from state system to community college, and now at a large research one. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Toya. Anne-Marie.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. My name is Anne-Marie Klotz. I work as the Vice President for Development, Enrollment, and Student Success at a small school in Boulder, Colorado called Naropa University. I would say that I worked in traditional higher ed for the first 20 years of my career, and now for the last 4 have been firmly in more of a non-traditional role. Our school has 70% grad students, 30% undergrad, which I recognize as the flip. And I also work here primarily from my home in New York City, but I am in Colorado 5 to 10 days a month in a hybrid role. So good to see you all.
All right, so I've got some questions here for our panelists. And then also, again, we invite questions from the audience. Please let us know if there's something you want us to dive deeper on. But Anne-Marie, let's start with you. With this topic of supporting and motivating higher ed staff, the question is, what hiring biases related to higher education experience and time commitments have you observed and worked to overcome?
Many. So I'll start by saying, the old adage of what got you here won't get you there. I mean, I think that's really where I feel like higher ed is right now. So the traditional path of, well, we have to have someone who is a student leader, and then they go to grad school, and then they do all of these things, and then we pick them up. I think part of maybe because I work at more of a non-traditional place now, it's more accepted that there's more than one path. But just a few things that I would share and things we've done differently. Number one, we're interviewing an admissions counselor right now who was a former provost. So I think age is the first one that comes to mind. There's a lot of people who are saying, hey, I got to my pension time, 55, 60, 65, I got more to give. And so I'm definitely open to people wanting to look at non-traditional paths in that way. The second is about pauses or a hiatus in your professional career. Who doesn't have one at this point, right? Like if I see them now, especially post-pandemic, I'm like, yeah, I don't even need to talk about this. Two things I did in the pandemic is I was able to hire two people who were at a pause or inflection point in their career. So I picked someone who had been a vice president for development, had recently gotten married and had to relocate to her partner's new state. And I said, can you work remotely for us for 6 months and help us with grant writing? Done. I had another person who said, I really need to make some changes in my career, but I feel like I have a lot to give and I don't know my next path yet. I said, great, let's think about how we can set you up in the Dean of Students doing some case management work. I think we have to be flexible in our approach in order to get the very best people possible. I also think that the very best people possible maybe didn't have a master's in higher ed. Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of great people who have, but if I get someone who's working at Chase Bank in customer service or a bank teller, whatever the case might be, I know they've dealt with a lot of challenging personalities, situations, and processes that make them uniquely situated to be able to work on a campus environment. So I think the biases that I tend to hear are around age, experience levels, you don't have the check boxes, and sort of non-traditional paths. And the more that we say that higher ed is inclusive of all paths means that we must be innovative in our approach to hiring those staff who serve them. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Any of the other panelists have anything related? Wonderful. All right. Lisa, you're next. Thinking about hiring practices. How can we reframe our hiring practices in light of a new professional post-COVID world?
Well, the new professional today is very different than the new professional from even 5 years ago because of COVID. Some of what you would think as a new professional, the 22, 23-year-old, brand new right out of grad school, many of them now actually lived through COVID and had most of their classes online. That's what they were used to. Whereas the new professional 10 years ago, they went to the class. They had the opportunity to do internships. They had the opportunity to work directly with the students in person. So their experience was very different. And that's something we have to keep in mind when we are hiring new professionals now, is that their experience is very different from all the new professionals that came before them. So how do we reframe that? Their expectations are very different. They are coming into jobs that they don't feel a commitment to staying in a job. There have been times that a new professional has started a job and a week later they've left and didn't even tell people that they were leaving. They left their keys behind, walked out, even to the point of, the police were getting called to go to do wellness checks because they just did not want to call and say, I'm not interested in this job anymore, I'm leaving. They just left. Some people just don't show up for the first day. I've had a person quit an hour before they were supposed to start, never even stepping foot on campus, but they had quit. So the new professional is very different now than they were 10 years ago. Now, thinking about the hiring practices and the procedures, that is very different as well, because COVID made us really look at how do we do our hiring practices? What do we look at? How do we go through that process? In the past, we'd have a multi-step process. You'd have your phone interview. Then you might have another phone interview. Then you might have a campus interview. Then you might have a meeting with the president or the vice president. Then you might have a written part. And there were a lot of steps. So with the new professional, that's not something that is really working with them. So some of that has changed. So now we've got Zoom interviews. Unfortunately, that means that when you're on the hiring committee, because I'm on the hiring committee for both faculty and staff, sometimes you can't really hide your facial expressions to some of the answers when you're on a Zoom call, as opposed to a phone interview. But that's something that we've all had to adjust to. And so the questions have changed as well. because the new professionals, a lot of them are looking for certain things that they expect. They expect to be able to work remote. They expect that they're looking for colleges that put the well-being of the staff at the forefront and the well-being of the students at the forefront. So there's different expectations from the new professionals that we see now than what we saw 6-10 years ago. So COVID has changed a lot of the philosophy of even going through the job search process, but also for the hiring committees.
Go ahead, Toya.
Well, and I would just add to that, making sure that we delineate, because we have new professionals who are new professionals in general. This is their first start, entry level. And then we have new professionals who are new to higher ed. And so we have these norms, if you will, within higher ed. And we have to recognize that for new professionals, or rather new employees coming into higher ed, that we have to take the time to kind of educate them on some of the cultural norms. Not saying those norms are always right, because we have things that we've been doing for a bazillion years, but there is definitely a culture in higher ed. And so I think it's important as employers that we have to be cognizant and pay some special attention to people who are new to the field as well.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because the other part of the hiring process and the practice is, if it's a new professional coming from a different industry where the hiring process goes much faster, and they come into higher ed and they're like, this is taking months, being more clear and upfront with the candidates, like making sure that the online process, obviously a lot of the processes are online now, that your HR, your human resources department, or the hiring team is updating and communicating with the candidates, saying, this is where we're at in the process. You've moved forward or you haven't, or we've hired someone, making sure that communication is happening to all the candidates, and explaining that, yes, unfortunately, higher ed does go a little bit more slow, especially if you're in the public sector versus the private. And it really differs if you're coming from a completely different industry as far as the timing. So educating the candidates right up front is helpful. One of the things we changed here due to COVID is when we hire new administrative staff, they have to take a typing test. Well, prior to COVID, they would have to take this typing test before I would even see their application. They had to pass it. Well, with COVID, one of the things that HR changed is they said, now they have to take that typing test after they've been hired. They have 3 months in order to pass it. So now I can see the applications right away. So that was a good change. So really thinking through some of the HR policies that may need to change based on COVID and expectations, really thinking through all of that.
Anne-Marie?
Yeah, just to add a couple of things to these great comments. One, I think it's really important in the interview process to ask about their lifestyle needs. So things like, do you have a faith tradition that it would be helpful to connect you to? What do you like to do after hours? Oh, you're into yoga? Let me give you some places in the area. Because we know that staff are making decisions based on the life they're going to have, in addition to maybe the job they're going to take. And then the second part I would say is your expectations for work being crystal clear prior to the offer. So, oftentimes we think, oh, it's the first day, I'm going to share my expectations. I meet with every candidate as the VP of our division, with every finalist. So every person that they say, we really want to bring them to their team, I do my best to review what my expectations are of that person, and when possible to provide them with a written copy. Because we often hear, I think when people leave, it wasn't what they thought. So I think the more that we can share what it is, I see a couple of my staff on this call, I'd be like, let me tell you what part is crazy. Okay, here we go. So I think the more that we can be open and honest, it helps us to set up for longevity in the role.
Just one other, Addie, if I can add one more thing. If you're hiring people from out of state, going above and beyond, helping them with that transition. We just hired somebody from another state. They've never lived here. They had a whole family, kids and everything, that needed to adjust to new schools. And I provided a lot of information, and I felt like I needed to provide them with a lot of additional information about this new community to help them feel welcomed. And actually had conversations with the kids to find out, what do you like to do, and giving them suggestions of things that they could do here in Chicago. So making that connection with the whole family, not just with the candidate, after they had accepted and as they were in the process of moving. I think that was really helpful. And I don't think I did that as well in prior years as I do now since COVID. Because you do have to work extra hard at making that connection now in the post-COVID world, because people are working remote. So you have to think of new ways on how to connect with people.
Jason.
Yeah, I think I would add, when we were developing the 21st century employment and higher ed information, one of the things that kept coming up was, the hiring processes prior to COVID were really, like Lisa had mentioned, bringing people to campus and, getting to know things. And, for some positions, you're bringing people in for a full day, 2 days, and it may not necessarily be practical. And so, we're having to rethink how we're going about those processes as well. And, I think, you can still provide opportunities for folks to meet different people throughout the process via Zoom now that we didn't have, 5 years ago, or we weren't utilizing 5 years ago. And, if you are going to be bringing folks on, making sure that that experience is something that's meaningful and educational for them, and not just something where you're kind of rushing them around campus and, taking them real quick to dinner and then, taking them back to the airport. Those processes aren't beneficial, to the candidates like they used to be. And, a lot of information is, readily available online, but, if you can have kind of a, set packet of some of the information that we've been talking about available, kind of on the front end, and making sure that that information is available on the websites. I work for the federal government. My experience is clearly very different, but, they are very upfront about, this position is covering, moving expenses. This one, it's located in DC. If you're outside of DC, you're going to have to, have your own moving expenses covered. And so, making sure that that information is out there in the job descriptions, making sure that the salary range is in the job descriptions also. I'm a huge proponent for that. And I know, some universities are, they don't do that. Some folks aren't going to apply for those jobs just because, why are they going to waste their time? If you're not going to be upfront on the salary, they don't want to get to the end of the process and find out that, the salary range isn't something that is affordable for them. And so just keeping those things in mind, and I highly recommend reading that information from the 21st Century Report that ACPA put out 2 years ago. It's something that I really do believe that is beneficial to, both the hiring manager as well as, prospective employees. It really should be one of those documents that folks read, regularly, to remind them of, that those transitions that people go through at different stages of their career.
Thank you, Jason. I've used that document myself. As you know, I also was part of that team, but just job descriptions in general, right? Looking at job descriptions in light of the current employee market. And, one of the biggest changes now that I'm in a position to make change on those types of things. And a lot of this has to deal with, where are you? Are you advocating for some of these changes? Are you in a position to make some of these changes? Is removing all duties as assigned, our favorite student affairs, higher education tagline in every job description that really means nothing, and is not valuable, right, to these employee and employer. So just looking at job description total. So thank you for bringing that up, Jason. We're going to jump over to Toya and change topics a little bit here as we keep on moving. Toya, what are some new ways to ensure recognition becomes the common instead of the exception in our work?
I think that's a great question. And I have to start off by saying that it's important that we recognize all employees, not just the rock stars who have gotten some sort of recognition throughout the year. And, I currently have roughly about 600 employees, and that includes my students. I also have about 1,500 student employees between residence halls, dining centers, et cetera. And so I think it's important that we recognize all employees and the work that they do. And additionally, I would add that we don't just recognize them once a year. You know, I know we always have these end of the year celebrations and we give out awards and all of that is great. But I think we have to recognize the hard work that happens throughout the year and not just on one day. And so, for example, I have to be very strategic because we do have a yearly staff appreciation day. But most of the people here on campus do theirs in May. And that's because it's the end of the year, it's after commencement, et cetera. I can't do mine in May because my staff is working. They've already jumped right into orientation the week after commencement. I have people cleaning residence halls and doing all these things. And so they don't necessarily even get a summer break until maybe end of July because they're doing orientation and other things. And so I recognize, first of all, I've got to pick a time. So our staff appreciation day ends up being in August, and it's not even a appreciation for everything you've done over the year. I also include the work you've done this summer. Many of you worked during orientation. You all have been flipping rooms. You've been flipping rooms from our students to our summer campers and all those folks. And then you had to clean them and get them ready for the incoming students. And so I always want to make sure that I recognize and acknowledge that. This year, I had a staffer come to me and say, gosh, I feel like we should be doing a little bit more. Maybe we can do some fun activities and not just do the one event. So what started off as Staff Appreciation Day, which was always on a Thursday, turned into Staff Appreciation Week. And every single day of the week, we did something fun. We tied in some things with wellness and activities. We had dress up and theme days, and people really got into it. We had twin day, and people dressed as their work bestie, and they all came in. And now I will admit that part of all of this included this candy bar, and we had all this food or all this candy left over, like a candy buffet. And we said we were going to give it to the RAs. Well, it's been like 3-4 weeks since we did that, and all the candy is in my conference room right now. I digress. I need recognition too, right? And so, but one of the things that we did was realize, wow, if we do this over a period of time, and I've been here for 4 years. This was the first year I started getting emails like, this whole recognition week was so cool, and thank you for including it. But we also had to be cognizant because we have different types of employees. So I have my merit and hourly staff. I've got the custodians and the maintenance folks who clean residence halls and clean that. And so some of them work from 6 to 2, others of them work from 2 to 8. So I have to time something that overlaps so that those people can still take advantage of it. And so I think we have to be more cognizant and more thoughtful in our planning of recognition of our staff, recognizing that we have different types of staff. We want to recognize them for all sorts of things. We do, of course, our annual recognition, 25 years of service, all this wonderful thing. But there are people who give in our work every single day, and all they simply want is a thank you or an acknowledgement or I see you. And so I think that we have to be more thoughtful in this. I think that we are, especially I'm seeing it with newer professionals. They're like, look what I did. And I'm like, you're supposed to, that's part of your job. but they want that recognition, that affirmation. And so I think as supervisors, it's important that we do that. I think it helps build a culture. It helps show a culture of care, concern, and support. And so I've really kind of stepped up my own game during this season about how we recognize all employees for all of the efforts and recognize that their efforts may look different. And so it's appropriate to acknowledge them for their specific work.
Toya, I want to commend you on your self-restraint because candy would not last that long in my area. That's my go-to. So good for you.
Well, the candy buffet is next to my coffee maker. And so I go in with the Keurig, and every day for like the past month, I've had a cup of coffee and a handful of Starburst for breakfast. Don't judge me.
All right. If it's chocolate, you put it in the coffee cup. You're
There
good.
you go. You already know.
Anne Marie?
Toya, I'll just say that Starburst in my book is fruit. So I think that was a great way to start the day. A couple of things I'd add, and first of all, I recognize I'm at a private school, and that can also dramatically impact your ability and the recognition side. But what I'll share is I try to be pretty flexible with comp days, especially as I see people working in the ways that they do, especially at the start of the year. For younger staff, they seem to love when I give them kudos over email and copy our president. And I'll say, Chuck, I want you to see that this great work that's been done. So I think that can be motivating for the right people. There's also a really cool app that I use. It's called TouchNote, like TouchNote. And basically think about it like this. You go to one of your staff members' programs and it's awesome. And you take a picture of the event, like a cool moment of the event, and you basically can do it. It's like $4 and you can send them a postcard to their house with that picture and basically say like, I was there, I showed up, it was great. It's a great way to like mark special moments. And people feel special, I think, I don't know, when they get the postcard. And then finally, I know we're not like supposed to always talk about money in these spaces, but I'll just share that every year I dedicate at least 15%, looking at 15% of our staff for raises whenever possible. Like beyond, the merit piece to say like what's possible given what they do. And, I'm on year 4, so have I gotten through everybody? No. But to me, it's definitely, it has to be talked about that if you want to retain good people, the best way to do it is to make sure that they're fairly compensated.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. In the chat, I just want to point out a few things real quick. Carol has posted the link to the report that Jason and I had referenced, so that's in there earlier. Also, some kudos to Anne-Marie for your comments. And Jason, you have your hand up, so I'll let you also hit your comment since your hand is up.
Sure. So first off, I appreciate recognition as a former orientation director that there are folks that work in the summer. And so that I will say that after I left my last position as an orientation director, having my summers back has just been phenomenal. So you don't get to take vacation until like, February. And it really does impact a lot of stuff in your life. But in terms of recognition, obviously, like I said, I work for the federal government. And so, they do things where they give us 59 minutes as recognition, which is, you get to leave 59 minutes early, one day a month or something if you get recognized. They don't give an hour because then you have to take leave. And so 59 minutes is kind of, it's always nice to be able to take that extra time at the end of a day that you may need to, just kind of scoot out early. And so, the other thing, in terms of recognition is often, sometimes things, it doesn't have to be a thing, it can be just stopping in and like recognizing that the person is in their office and just going to see, how things are going. It doesn't have to be, anything that is, hugely important. It's just stopping in. And, now that we're, all working, remote or partly remote or hybrid or in the office all the time, you're not seeing everybody that you used to, say, 5 years ago. And so, sometimes it's important to just stop in and check in on folks and see how things are going and, seeing, if there's anything that they need. And I think sometimes that, to me, always means a little bit more, and just, swinging by their office or swinging by, their building and, see how things are going, see how they are, not necessarily even having the conversations about work, and just recognizing, who they are as a person, and not as much as, the employer conversations that we often, jump right into, and just, walking by and, checking in, that sometimes that recognition goes a lot further than, some of the stuff that people are thinking in terms of recognition.
Great. Thank you, Jason. So actually, our next question is going to be for Jason, so you get to stay off mute. That's great. Before I ask it, though, again, just want to remind, if anybody in the audience has questions, please pop them into the chat, or after Jason's done with this question, feel free to raise your hand. I'll put you on the spot and you could ask yourself. But Jason, you've talked about it, you're higher ed adjacent, right? Working for the federal government. What does the structure of higher education look like now? To somebody who's on that outside, but also knows the inside from both experience and then the work that you're doing, especially, as you're reviewing some of these grant opportunities that might be available for staff members and institutions.
Yeah, so, one of the things that always stands out to me is, how often when we think of grants, we're thinking of like the grants office or a faculty member, submitting grants. And, I try to remind folks that, even in terms of the recognition, it's not extra work when you bring in somebody that's really good or wants to, expand their horizons to come in and support writing a grant to have that opportunity for professional development. And, those are the types of things I think that, go really far, for somebody for their career. We can, easily give somebody a, $1,000 bonus because they did really great, or, working with them to understand, we don't have the money this year, but, you've done a really great job on these things. And I know that you want to get some professional development, why don't you come sit with us, and help us, write some of the grant proposals that are needed. The other thing, as higher ed has changed and evolved, one of the big things when it comes to, especially for federal grants, is just evidence-based grant making. We really are looking for institutions when it comes to submitting grants that are doing things that are based in some of the evidence and some of the practices that we know are effective. And whenever I talk to folks in grants offices and institutional research offices for some of our grant programs, letting them know that, it's really important to have some of that evidence-based research. And, some of our young folks, they're reading this research coming out of, their graduate programs. And when I say young folks, I'm new professionals, I should say, that they are coming out of graduate programs and, they are reading the most up-to-date literature that some of us may not be able to. We don't have the time to do some of that stuff that, we always think that we do, and we really don't. And so, bringing them to the table to talk about, some of the practices that, are effective. And so, having them when it comes to, developing grant proposals, having them at the table sometimes it's really critical because they can bring a voice to the conversation for your grant proposals. And so, that to me, when I think of some of the opportunities that I had coming up through student affairs and through higher ed, it was somebody who believed in my ability to provide a voice to the work that we were doing. And, some of the best grant proposals that we review are the ones that aren't in silos, that aren't in singular units, that aren't coming directly out of this XYZ faculty member wants to improve the graduation rate in their program. It's people who are coming together with financial aid, with student activities, with student affairs, with building out some opportunities that are kind of across the institution, because when you're writing those things, you are ensuring that there's accuracy as to what's happening on your campus. You're understanding what exists on your campus, what doesn't exist, where the opportunities are for improvement, and really you're building out some of the logic models that are needed for the work that you're trying to accomplish. And so, when I'm thinking about the work that I do and ways to really improve some of the opportunities for professionals, it is about, having more people at the table and more people who are kind of breaking down the work and collaborating. And, we all know that, we've said for years that, some of the best opportunities for students are opportunities where, the institution isn't siloed, and that people are working together, and you're improving the overall institutional capacity for that work. And so, I always tell folks, when it comes to writing the grants, doing those things, and when you're thinking about the current structure of higher ed and post-secondary education, it isn't the structure that we knew when we were going through, or isn't the structure, I've only been with the department for almost 9 years now. And, 9 years ago, that campus life was very different. It was very, very different. And, it was 5 years ago, it was 2 years ago. And so, having those chances, to make change, I think right now, it's going to set the strategic direction of post-secondary education moving forward. And, those institutions that are being innovative and that are willing to, accept the realities that we are in are the ones that are going to do well moving into the future. And so, that's probably the biggest piece of advice from an external point of view, is just really recognizing the importance of innovation and the need to make change and shifting away from what we've always done.
Thank you, Jason. Charla, I want to thank you for being brave and throwing out the question. And so it isn't geared towards any specific speaker here. So as you guys hear it, and just raise your hand and we'll call on you. But as Charla said, is there anything specific you do for onboarding, supporting, motivating remote employees, especially those that are new to the higher ed world? Go ahead, Lisa.
I can't find my hand. I was like, fine, I'll just raise my actual hand. Um, so one of the things, sorry, one of the things that we've done here, because we don't have 100% remote, is that in the first 30 days, the first 90 days, everybody who's new has to work on campus. But now we've gone to, instead of every month of new orientations, we have quarterly, and everybody who was hired in that same quarter come together for a group meeting so they get to meet the other new people at that time. But then they also have online trainings that they're having to go through. So they have kind of like a class through our Canvas as a new employee. Also, all new employees are given a mentor on campus. And it might be somebody who has a similar job, but in a different department, but allows them to get together. So during COVID, I actually had two mentees, and one of them, because of COVID, we only met outside. We were both in mask, and we still had that interaction, but then we also did video calls. The other one, we've been able to have some lunches and things like that together. But the college has set up these mentorship opportunities, and it's not just for staff, but also for faculty. So our new faculty also get a mentor who's from outside of that department. So they have somebody to talk to about any issues that come up or weird things that they don't want to ask their own department chair or their own dean. They have this other person that they can say, I feel like I learned this in orientation, but I don't remember how to do it. And they don't feel as weird asking that person. So my mentees have asked me a lot of questions that they learned from their bosses, but they couldn't remember. So they've come to me, and that works out really well. So it's another way to give the new employee a touch point to someone on campus who's outside of their department. But then our CTL, our Center for Teaching and Learning, also creates this online environment for them to get resources that they need, and then also creates a space for them to come together to meet one another. So they have kind of their own small cohort within this larger college.
Thanks, Lisa. Jason?
I think, I still truly believe in the importance of meetings. And so, and it's not, those meetings that can be emails, but, just once a month getting together, as a team, or a group of team leaders. One of the things, we see a lot of transition in the federal government. And so often, you get different types of leaders come in, and, I think some of the best leaders are the ones that actually bring people all to the table and actually have those conversations, once a month or once every other month. And just ensuring that, people feel like they're being heard, and they're also, feel like they have an opportunity to provide a voice that they may have not had in the past. The other thing, we do an annual survey, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, where we essentially go in and provide, perspective of, what, and it's anonymous, and they, generate all of this data across all the federal agencies. They kind of rank it, based on, extra large, large, medium, small agencies. And, the Department of Ed is a medium-sized agency. And so for us, where do we rank? And then they break it down based on your individual areas. And so, each one, they really do challenge us to try to, do the survey. But then, they also provide back out what that survey tells folks, and what the responses are, and, where we are in comparison to other agencies, and where we are in comparison to other units within ed. And so, I think, ensuring, if there's a way to get to your president and say, we really want to survey employees on an annual basis to kind of gauge where they are, and finding the resources to do that ensures that, folks feel like they are being asked first off. And then, when you're providing the data back, when folks say, well, I'm not going to do the survey because we don't do anything with it, making sure that you're actually providing that information back to your employees to say, this is what the survey told us. And so we're going to, find new ways to engage our employees, or find new ways to, to reward our employees, or to support our employees, who are maybe, having some transition, questions and those types of things. And just really, making sure that you are listening and providing the feedback on a regular basis, and then bringing that back to your institution to say, okay, now that we've heard you, this is what we're going to do to implement some change.
I'd also add, so I supervise both in-person and remote employees. And one of the things that remote employees miss out on the most is the banter, the water cooler conversation piece of that. And so being very intentional about that. As a vice president, if I'm going to meet with one of my direct reports, I'm going to them instead of them coming to my office when I can, because it allows me the excuse, the reason in my mind to walk through their space and connect and say at least hello to every one of the employees or staff members under that area. But you don't get that same effect with the remote staff. And so we are a Google School, and I will use GChat for that, where I will just send random messages to them and be like, hey, how's it going? You need anything? This is what just happened on campus. There was just a fire drill that happened over in whatever building it was, or, some of those moments that if you were on campus, you would experience it, and just trying to bring them into it. So it's very intentional, or having to be very intentional behind that. Toya, your hand went up and then down, but I don't know if it timed out.
No, I went up, but then I looked and I was going to chime in, and then I looked over and Rachel has an amazing question.
She does.
And I wanted to be cognizant of time. So I wanted to make sure to draw your attention to that so we can try and see who can answer that for her.
Yes. So Rachel's question, curious about strategies for folks are using to sensitize older generations. And thank you for saying that millennials are the older generation, right? Because with everything that's going on with Gen Z, and their approaches to work, I hear some different approaches, deficit-minded language about how Gen Z is navigating the workspace. So strategies that you suggest. And I was going to pass this off to Anne Marie, and Anne Marie, you've got your hand up, so you knew it. There you go.
A lot to say about this, so I was like, I'll just write it. I mean, here's what I'll share too. So I'm a professional in my 40s with a supervisor in his 70s. So these are like really important conversations that I'm always having with him, being like, it's not 1974. So here's what we're thinking about, right? And so, I mean, luckily we have a good relationship. So he's like willing to hear me on that. But I do think I have to check myself sometimes too, because, the way that I came up, it was like, you hit the ground running and you work all of the hours and you don't stop, right? I came from housing. I mean, those of you who came up that path understand that life. And so it was a change for me. And I was like, I wish I would have had someone like some of these younger people being like, actually, I'm going to put a little bit more of a boundary up. That being said, I think there has to be a middle ground. I think that those on the ground roles do require a lot. And to think that those entry level roles can be just clock in, clock out, do 30 something-ish hours and we're good, that doesn't work. But again, that goes back to what are your expectations and how are those very clearly being met? So I know I'm coaching a person right now who's a director of housing, and he was like, we helped to craft language that was like, these are the expected amount of hours in the month of August and September that we expect by and large that you'll be working after 5 or on weekends. I've never had anything so prescriptive, but what it did is it helped their team to not be like angry about it, because at least we gave it to them ahead of time. So I think the more that we can do the pre-work and the more that we can kind of slap down the notion of like, well, this isn't what we did, right? Well, no one's saying that worked either. But I think you do have to have open communication. I mean, for me, it's always about the ROI. When I lose good people, it's harder to me to have to replace than to do what I need to do to retain good people. So I think part of that is on us to be willing to pivot and change our strategies. And, maybe you can teach an old dog new tricks,
Toya, please.
Well, and I was going to add to that because I feel like I'm in the in-between sandwich generation, right? Because to your point, Anne Marie, my boss is almost 70. I'm in my 40s. A lot of my staff are in their 30s and 20s. And so I have to be cognizant because you're working it both ways. And so I think we have to be open to that. I'll be honest, I'm very candid. I have a lot of younger professionals and I'm like, these kids, like, they're worse than the students, you know. But one of the things that I've been working on, besides fussing, right, is the coaching piece. You know, one of the things that I have really kind of put emphasis on when talking to some of the younger professionals is kind of showing them this is your shift. Like, you're advancing now as a professional. What does it mean to be a young professional? And a lot of times, sometimes just because of they're only not too far removed from the undergraduate or even the graduate school experience themselves, they kind of operate like students. And so I use that as coachable, teachable moments and coachable moments to say, you are a professional now. And so no, while I know I am just as passionate about that cause, you probably can't be out there demonstrating with the students. Okay? I get it. And so I try to use examples like that and really be open in conversations with a lot of my newer professionals to explain to them the why, not just no, you can't do it, but you know, we're changing now, you're shifting. I'm just as passionate about that same cause, but as a professional in this field, you know, I recognize I know what side my bread is buttered on, you know. And so while I want to get out there and fight the power with the rest of you, I also want that paycheck on Friday. And so I think that there's opportunities for us as supervisors and leaders in the field to teach certain things and to use real life examples of things that are happening to help work with both generations. And so there are certain things that I tell my president, and then I'm like, okay, I need you to catch up with me. And I, you know, and so she sees me as this outgoing, gregarious person who dances on stage during the new student orientation and when we're welcoming students in the fall. And so the irony, I went upstairs for something to meet with her today, and I was kind of in a little funky mood. And she's standing there, she sees me, and she starts dancing. And I'm like, what are you dancing for? And she says, well, Toya, when you dance, it makes the students feel good. So I thought I'd dance for you to make you feel good. And I was like, you know what? You actually be paying attention to me sometimes. And so I think a big piece of all of this is the conversation. And I think that's why Rachel's question stood out, because it's obvious that we have to talk about things and we have to develop strategies, because this is something that I think is really prevalent right now, and probably not just in higher ed, but just in the workforce in general. You have multi-generations all coming together, trying to advance efforts and do work. And so I'm so glad that you brought that question up, Rachel.
And Anne Marie, I appreciate your point too of the expectations of what that extra time is. Like, it ties all in together. Overseeing enrollment, enrollment management, financial aid. My favorite is the admissions counselors, and you know, we have to pull some of those expectations right into the interview process. You know, and this is what travel looks like, and you get the answer for, oh, I love traveling. Like, no, you don't. You don't love this type of travel, right? You're not staying in a glorious hotel on the beach. And although if you want to stay in a glorious hotel at the beach, come to ACPA 25. You know, there's your commercial. But like, really, like, this is what the real expectations are, and this is what travel season might look. This is what housing looks like at this time of year, what orientation could be. So these are great examples that we just have to make sure we're bringing all together at the right time for the staff. Lisa.
I had to unmute myself. One of the other thoughts that I had was leading by example, because what we do as leaders, others see that. So for example, I've gotten much better over the years of creating life-work balance. Sometimes faculty members will like to text me after hours and I don't respond unless it's an emergency. If it's an emergency, sure. But if it's just asking me a general question, I'm not going to answer. And some of the faculty would get really upset with that, because, you know, different generations. And then one of them actually came to me and they're like, that they appreciated the fact that I did that because they learned more about work-life balance from me, and they were able to improve their own work-life balance by seeing what I did. So I found that to be really helpful for me to know that just by leading by example, I didn't say anything, I just did it, that it helped them make the adjustment. And when I was gone for the past 2 weeks in Europe, I told everybody, I'm like, I'm not checking work email, I'm not checking my phone. Good luck. I'll respond to everything when I get back. And for some people, that's, but everyone handled it just fine. The world kept moving. You don't, and I tell new professionals this all the time, you have to have work-life balance and you have to put your health first because the only person who's going to do that is you. So I'm always working with new professionals to make sure that they're, putting their own mental health and their own physical health really high up on their list in this middle of working and creating that life-work balance.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. And Anne-Marie, thank you for the suggestion in the chat here. The creation of a one-page a day in the work life of blank
Yes.
professional, so they can get a sense of what meetings are, what the flow of the semester is, all that. So thank you. If for those that don't believe it, we have 2 minutes left in this 1 hour webinar session. So I appreciate the time and the energy that all of our folks here have put in to sharing knowledge. And this is what ACPA does so well, the sharing of knowledge so that we can continue to serve our students and our staff members better each day that we're out there, because it is a continuous process for us. With 1 minute left, I'm going to ask each of our they don't know I'm doing this, so I'm going to ask each of our panelists for that last nugget of truth that they want to get out before we disappear. And so I'm going to start with Anne-Marie because I'm staring at your picture.
Treat your people well.
Great. Jason?
Probably, create your own professional development opportunities and don't assume that your institution is going to do it for you.
Lisa?
Jason took mine. Now, then I'm going to have to say to lead by example by creating your own work-life balance.
Toya?
Ask lots of questions. I think oftentimes as new professionals and new to roles, we, don't want to make it seem like we don't really know what's going on, but you don't. And so ask lots of questions.
And I'd say change. Remember that we are in this moment of change, and change is ugly and beautiful, and it takes time. It never happens quickly, but we are changing cultures and minds. So just remember that it's all right, and it'll go 12 different directions, but we're going to make change. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to the panelists. We appreciate you all. Have a wonderful October.